Precedence is a very important constraint to consider when line balancing because it defines the required build sequence of your product or products. This means that when you're defining precedence, you want to think about which tasks have to follow other tasks and which tasks could be performed in parallel or don't require other tasks being completed before they can be completed. To get to the precedence network in Assembly Planner, you want to make sure you have your routing open and then switch to the Graph tab. And you want to make sure that you have the routing and everything underneath it checked out. This is the warning that I'm seeing now because I don't have the routing checked out yet. You want to make sure that no one has any of the operations or the activities underneath the routing checked out, because in order to edit precedence, you have to have the ability to edit all of the activities in the routing. So once you have it checked out, if you're starting the precedence definition for the first time, you want to decide where your starting point should be. Do you want to assume that all tasks could be performed in parallel and you don't have very many build sequence restrictions? Or do you want to start with the assumption that the sequence that you've defined your activities is, for the most part, the way the assembly has to be performed? If you want to think about everything being in parallel, then you can start with a blank predecessors column in the sheet view. And what this means, if we switch to the graph view, is that all of these tiles represent activities, and none of them are tied to one another. So this means at this point that any activity could be performed at any time. Now we know this isn't necessarily realistic, but we're just looking for our starting point. If you want to start with having to follow the sequence that's been defined in your routing and operations, then you can click on the default precedence button. And this is going to establish what we call a straight line precedence, where each activity has to follow the one that precedes it as the activities are currently laid out. And in the sheet view, it'll look like this, so that the number called out in the predecessors row is indicating the task row which the current task has to follow. So in this example, I have a 1 for this activity in row 2. That means the activity in row 1 has to precede the activity in row 2. And then the activity in row 2 has to precede the activity in row 3, etc. If you switch to the graph view, you see that all activities have been placed in line so that one activity always has to follow the next all the way down the task list. So to make adjustments to the precedence, we'll start in the sheet view. If you want to remove a predecessor, you can simply delete the value. And this means that at this point, the screw brackets together could be started at any time. If you have a task that is the predecessor for more than one other task, then you'll just have the value listed twice. So by changing this, now I'm saying that the tasks in row 4 and 5 can't be done until the task in row 3 is done. And if you have a task that can't be done until 2 other tasks have been completed, then you can create a comma-separated list of these row numbers. So if I want to say that the task in row 7 can't be done until the tasks in row 6 and row 2 can't be done, then I would enter it this way. And if I switch to the graph view, any changes that I make in the sheet view will also update the graph view. So this is what the precedence looks like based on the edits that I made in the sheet view. Now I see that I want to connect this activity to a different activity. It is a predecessor to a different activity. So as long as I'm in edit mode, I'm going to click in the middle of the task tile And holding the mouse down, I'm going to drag an arrow into the task successor. Okay, and when I let go, those two tasks are now connected. If I want to delete a precedence line, then I can simply click on that line, hit the delete key on the keyboard, and I've removed the precedence constraint. Okay. If you make changes to the graph view and then you can click on the auto layout button and it will adjust and it'll lay out the precedence network cleanly again for you. If you switch to the zoom mode, which you can do by clicking on the toolbar, or you can right click and select zoom, you can switch between the edit, the zoom, and the pan modes. With the zoom, you can select an area and it'll zoom in on that. You can also use your mouse scroll bar, if you have one, to zoom in and to zoom out. And if you switch to pan mode, then you can grab the graph and drag it along. Okay, but anytime you want to add or remove precedence lines, you want to make sure that you're in the edit mode. Whatever precedence that you define here in this graph tab will be used in the line balance scenario, whether you manually move tasks or you use the default balance to automatically rebalance the line. If you manually move tasks, you will be allowed to violate precedence, but in this scenario, you will be shown constraint violations to let you know that you have violated your precedence. And if you run a default balance, precedence will never be violated. So while there are other constraints like monumental resource and work zone constraints that you can choose to turn on or off, precedence will always be followed.